Thank you, Esther, and to the League, and to all of you for being here tonight. I'm Andrew Gardner. In my former professional life, I was a full-time design historian, but these days I also dip my toes into the water of contemporary art. But I'm thrilled to be here to discuss one of my favorite topics, mid-century American design, with these lovely people to my left. We're really excited to be here to facilitate this discussion about the ways that the League has played a role in giving rise to notable careers in design in the first half of the 20th century, and how American industrial design as a field was shaped by the institutions that supported creative education. So we conceived of this panel as a way to think about how art education informs design thinking, and vice versa, and how the Art Students League was so critical in this discourse. It's fitting that we're having this conversation here when it was at the League, which was founded 150 years ago as an offshoot of the National Academy of Design, which was then deemed to be too conservative to support the burgeoning avant-garde American art scene. The League became known as a hotbed of radical experimentation and progressive artistic ideals. And after outgrowing its original home in Union Square, I'm sure many of you know this, it moved up here to 57th Street in what I would describe justifiably as an architectural masterpiece. And it has called this building home since the 1890s. It's notable that the artists and designers we'll discuss tonight came up in a world where design and the art of everyday life were increasingly a part of public discourse. As wartime economies gave way to a bevy of new to a bevy of new industries and materials, and a massive demand for new homes and the products that one required to live in them. Design was seen as a conduit for bringing modern art to the masses. So it's appropriate that people who are trained as artists went on to build prominent careers in design, just as American industry was increasingly focused on appealing to a broad consumer base. So tonight we're going to hear from two esteemed design historians. I'm really sorry that our third panelist, Lindsay Parrott from the Neustadt collection of Tiffany Glass, was not able to join us today. She is ill, and so Lindsay, we hope you feel better soon. The first to speak will be Steffi Duarte, a curator, design historian, and staff member at Manitoga, the Russel Wright Design Center in upstate New York. She's a graduate of the Royal College of Art in London and has worked for curatorial departments at the Victoria and Albert Museum, Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum, Cranbrook Art Museum, and the American Folk Art Museum. Steffi will explore the work of Russel and Mary Wright and their connections to the League and the ways that it informed their design practice. And then we will turn to curator and design historian Bridget Bartal. Bridget is the inaugural MillerKnoll Curatorial Fellow at Cranbrook Art Museum in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. Her upcoming project is an exhibition and publication titled Eventually Everything Connects, Mid-Century Modern Design in the US, opening in June 2025. In 2022, Bridget received her MA in Decorative Arts, Design History, and Material Culture from the Barr Graduate Center in Manhattan, and she currently serves on the publication committee of the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservancy. And Bridget will shed some light on her ongoing research on Estelle and Erwine Laverne, founders of the design company Laverne Originals, and another design couple who, in this case, met here at the League. Yep. So I'll turn it over to Steffi and let you take it from here.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I just want to start off by profusely thanking Esther, who just spoke before Andrew, and also Stephanie Cassidy, who's the archivist here at the League, for providing the impetus to explore this generally underexplored area of Mary and Russel Wright's lives. I also thoroughly want to thank Anne Wright, their only daughter, without whom this presentation would not be possible. She dug up the slides that you're about to see and is just an incredible force for good at Manitoga. So, the year in New York had made it impossible for me to take Princeton, declared Russel Wright, the American designer. reflecting on his time here, which was essentially 1921 to 1922. And by made it impossible, he basically meant that the Art Students League ruined him for the formal education in Princeton. He had landed here in the Art Students League at 17. He actually graduated from high school early. And if you ask Russell, it was because his father felt that he was too young to go to Princeton and that he should grow large and take in the athletics while he was there. But his 1 year here at the Leagues was more than just a mere interlude. It really profoundly changed the trajectory of his career. So instead of going to Princeton, like he had agreed to with his parents, to eventually take in a career in law, or pursue a career in law, he dropped out after 2 years and never received a formal education in terms of a degree. But the year of great growth that he had here really had a profound influence on his life. So at the League, Russel Wright initially enrolled in Kenneth Hayes Miller's morning drawing class and painting class. This is an example of Miller's work. Miller was a teacher to a lot of very prominent League students during his time period. But as Russell recalled in his oral history in the 70s, Miller obviously did not like my work because he would seldom stop to give me any criticism. So then Russell would ask for more feedback and recalled Miller observing that I was not painting, but I was carving on canvas, and that I showed more feeling for 3 dimension than 2. Sounds quite withering. I would have been devastated if someone told me that at 17. But he took it in stride. He believed that Miller's criticism was very astute and enrolled in A. Sterling Calder's sculpture class. As many of you know, A. Sterling Calder was not only an instructor here, but he's the father of Alexander Calder, another prominent alumni of the League. And so he took both Miller's class and A. Sterling Calder's class, especially the Calder head class, where Calder was conducting portrait modeling classes and, if time permitted, reliefs and figure compositions. He obviously loved it. Thanks to Anne Wright again, we were able to scan these large format negatives that were amongst Russell's paper. We have no idea if he was the artist of all of them. Chances are he wasn't, and it was his fellow League alumni. And for those of you who are familiar with the League, we actually just took a tour, and this is downstairs at the sculpture studio now. So that's kind of what it looked like more than 100 years ago in 1921. And, you know, by all accounts, not only did he love it, but he was actually good at it. So this is believed to be, again, none of these negatives were labeled, but we do believe that it was Russel Wright's sculpture that he made commemorating the memory of the League students who fought and passed in World War I, which by the time he was a student here had concluded about 3 years earlier. And it was entered into a League-wide competition, and it received a prize. According to the minutes of the League's Board of Controls, the prize was presented by a Dr. George Kurtz of Tiffany & Co. Thank you again to Stephanie Cassidy for digging that one out of your archives. And eventually Russell's shift to sculpture and the medium's embrace of working 3-dimensionally marked yet another turning point in his practice and set him on a path of becoming a prolific designer of everyday things in modern American life. But also significant was the connection he made with Boardman Robinson, who's also an instructor here and a political cartoonist. He was best known for the political cartoons he created during World War I, which were quite controversial at the time because his leanings were socialist. So one of these is from The Masses, a monthly magazine that supported socialist politics and was run by political activists like Max Eastman and John Reed. And its successor, after it was shut down because of the Espionage Act, The Liberator. Sorry. Yes, espionage, yeah. And just as important as Boardman Robinson, if not even more so, was Sally Whitney, who was Boardman Robinson's wife. Sally Whitney was a student of Rodin, and I love this description of her. A student of Rodin, she had come to Paris with talent, ambition, and with complete evidence of the hearty disapproval of her family. Unfortunately, this is the only picture I could find of her, which is such a shame, but at least we have it. And she's dressed up with her husband there, Boardman Robinson, for the grand opening of the Central City Opera House. Not the season, the Opera House, because, 1930s. And by the time that she had met Wright, and you can just tell what an incredible person she must have been because of the announcement up there saying, she's really getting married in a San Francisco newspaper. But Russell meeting her was hugely influential. He was roughly only a few years younger than her eldest son at that age. So they had she had a very maternal influence on him, and their studios were together. And she got him a job at this artist commune that she and her husband started in Martha's Vineyard called Chilmark's Barn House. So Max Ernest used to call it a place for creative people to think, where they all bought a barn together and they used the main barn to socialize, and all the little chicken coops became their houses. And I think that they only got internet. It still exists, a couple of years ago, just to give you the vibe there. But it was Wright's first time seeing the ocean. As Annie Wright likes to tell it, he told them he could swim. He actually could not swim. And part of his duties were babysitting. One of these is a historic image of Barnhouse, and the other is from that same stash of negatives. So we think he was doing crafts with the kids as well. And for Wright, this was not only the first time seeing the ocean and seeing this alternative lifestyle, but just significantly different from the very Quaker middle-class upbringing that he had had in Ohio. He also, for the first time, through Boardman Robinson, really got to know the Hudson River, which will come in handy later when I talk more about my institution. But it was his first time really experiencing the Hudson. As part of this, he went and visited the Boardman's home upstate in what they used to call Red Hill in Croton-Harmon, because it was Boardman Robinson, well-known socialist, Max Ernest, well-known activist, etc. And that would also, and I should add that the lithograph you see from Boardman was in Wright's possession. He actually left it to his daughter, so it clearly meant something to him. But by and large, the most influential legal alum in Wright's life was his wife, Mary Einstein Small. We only recently discovered that Mary Einstein Small was a legal alum, but it makes sense. And this is the example of the work she was doing roughly around the time that she was at the League. So she took modeling courses with Leon Linelti, who looks so brooding. I probably would have dated him in my 20s. And later with Miller Keyes. This is a portrait by Marsh. After taking a break to enroll as a special student at the Cornell School of Architecture and to do some traveling abroad, as one did back then, she would eventually come back to Lintelli's class. More examples of her work during this time period. And eventually she traveled upstate to study with another prominent mid-century artist, Ukrainian-American Alexander Archipenko. So this was her work later on, around 1927, 1928. And we know from the writing on the back of it that it was exhibited in the Opportunity Gallery, which was also where Milton Avery met a bunch of other illegal alums. And it was a program back in the day where you'd have famous jurists like Georgia O'Keeffe select relative unknowns and just give lesser known artists an opportunity to show their work. So they met, and in typical League style, keep it all in the family, Russel Wright's friend, Don Brown, also a League alum, signed his part of the wedding certificate. And Angelica Archipenko, who was Archipenko's first wife, signed for Mary. And together they created a line, but in terms of League impact, Russel Wright was always thought of by other designers as more of a sculptor and less of a drawer, sometimes in quite mean terms. Poulos, who is a design historian from the 80s, would say it's because Russell couldn't draw very well. I don't think so, but it really, the sculptural skills that they both gained here came in very handy. As you can see, I actually recognize some of the lines that did go into production from that photo. And not only was he focused in some of the sculptural qualities of the objects, so he was really interested in like, how does it feel to hold a bowl, and what color is it, and how does the color interact with the food, and like, what mood does it give? And those are all things that I think came out of his time at the League and his art education. Mary was hugely influential as well. Together they developed this lifestyle, a way of living, a modern way of living, and they wrote a book about it called Guide to Easier Living. This is a promotional image that they took, which I like to think of it as like husband and wife viewing domestic life as a battlefield and strategizing together. They also were big into designing entire rooms. They were big on their own product integration. So with these model rooms, you're not only seeing Wright furniture, but you're seeing Wright like tableware, anything that they also designed that they would put in. And it's worth mentioning that Mary had her own design line under her own name, Country Garden, which will be in Bridget's upcoming exhibition, along with some metalware and some textiles. And I'd say one of their last lasting legacies is Manitoga, where I work, a beautiful nature preserve and historic modernist house in upstate New York. Mary and Russell bought the land for it together, and there was a lot of planning that they did together for it. Unfortunately, Mary passed away before construction began on the actual house, even though they were living on the property. But it was planned for them. And I encourage you all to come upstate and visit it and see what your fellow League alums have built. Thank you.
And yeah, I definitely encourage you to go up and visit Manitoga. It's spectacular, especially in the summer. And Bridget.
Thank you, Steffi, and it's really an honor to be here with you both and with you all here today. I'm going to be presenting some recent research into partners in design, Estelle and Erwine Laverne. And despite the commercial successes that the Lavernes garnered during the mid-century period, they're still a very vastly understudied couple in design history. And my interest really got reignited by a rather striking quote from Playboy 1961 describing the Lavernes. They're described as the most outre of all furniture designers today. Outre meaning unusual or startling. A darkly mysterious couple, silent in movement, fiery in temperament, who blaze with a sense of the fabulous. What a quote. And so again, this really kind of magnetized me to their work and made me want to learn more. So in 1932, Estelle Lester meets Erwine Laverne here at the League, supposedly in the cafeteria. And as a contemporary writer described it, they decided they were allied in art and in life, and they were married 2 years later in 1934. And they would take classes on and off throughout their lives for nearly 40 years here at the Art Students League, with Irwin taking his last class in 1971. they almost never were taking classes together, but independently participated. And they took many figure drawing classes, which you will see come up in the later design work. But in 1938, Estelle and Irwin co-found their business, Laverne Originals, for which they would design fabrics, wallpapers, furniture, accessories, and interiors. And I really like to point out how they were really trying to make this kind of painterly background, this fine arts background, this craft background evident in their design business, really putting it forward for a potential consumer, even in the logo alone that you can see here on the screen. So Estelle fashions this kind of chunky, hand-built ceramic horse that they then photograph and incorporate into the logo. So again, really kind of making evidence of the hand present right off the bat, the first thing you see. And before diving into a few of the different bodies of their work, I wanted to just point out this 1948 advertisement from Arts and Architecture magazine, in which they state, "Let there be loveliness. Charm belongs in today's interiors." And to me, this really kind of reads as the Laverne Manifesto. They never work so staunchly as modernists, and maybe the way some of their competitors did, and they kind of go back and forth between more whimsical figurative works to more austere abstract modern designs, and to me this just really reads as kind of their designer statement. But I want to start with some of the fabrics and wallpapers that they design. In 1938 they begin predominantly hand screen printing fabrics and wallpapers. And here on the screen we have two examples of Estelle's work, both from likely 1947-48. And again, it really shows me how quickly, even in a single year, but also in a single line of fabrics, they're switching and kind of going back and forth between this very ornamented, kind of dense, figurative, whimsical, almost folkloric pattern on the left with the Pennsylvania Dutch. And then on the right, we have the repetitive, geometric, rugged square. And these are both Estelle's work from roughly the same year. This is just one other example of Estelle's designs. This is fun to run. And you'll see here two different colorways. The Lavernes did boast up to 50 colorways of their screen printed designs, which they were doing almost entirely themselves out of their home and studio. To just pivot quickly to some furniture designs, in the early to mid-1950s, they're actually commissioning a Pratt trio, Catavalos, Littell, and Kelly, to design all of their furniture. But that relationship dissolves by 1955, and they decide, let's give it a try ourselves. And so the first line that they work on is their portrait series in 1959. It's extremely short-lived, but you'll see here that Estelle particularly is hand-painting portraits onto their molded fiberglass chairs. She's also sometimes, as you'll see on the right, painting onto fabric slip covers so that the consumer had a bit of an option. Did they want to show the bold conversation piece portrait chair, or did they want to opt for the austere white fiberglass shell? You kind of got to pick and choose and outfit and style your chair based on even your day and your mood. But we were lucky to accession the only known surviving portrait chair into the Cranbrook Art Museum collection last year. And you'll see here, this is their fiberglass tulip chair with another portrait by Estelle. She just kind of playfully, the girl kind of playfully dangles a tulip above her head, filling out the top petal, and also sits crisscross applesauce, filling out the bottom seats. But I really just love the attention to detail and the matching lipstick to the bright orange jumpsuit. And you'll also see this wide cat eye that shows up time and time again in Estelle's paintings on furniture and murals, on accessories, etc. So keep an eye out for that. And again, goes to show after her figure drawing classes how this would show up in the work. A year later, they begin working on their Invisible group, which is their line of molded acrylic translucent chairs. And Estelle and Irwin were adept interior designers, and they really kind of thought, Estelle particularly thought, well, what's the best way to kind of add a spaciousness, a lightness, an airiness to a room to reduce clutter from a room? Let's literally make the chair invisible. And so this is just another example of their design work. These chairs were really widely published in fashion magazines. Here are two examples from Vogue 1960. And it makes sense. I think that the invisible chair lends a really futuristic look to a shoot, but also it allows the model to kind of recline gracefully while also not obstructing any view of her outfit from any angle. So it's really kind of genius for a fashion shoot. But again, I just wanted to show how widely their work was published, despite how little we kind of know about them now. And the last thing I want to touch on is the Lavernes are creating, like many architects and designers of their time did, what they call their total design environments. And so I just want to highlight one of Estelle's interior design projects. In the early 1960s, she's hired to design cafes and lobbies for Sheraton hotels across the country. This particular example is Cafe Caprice from Sheraton Hotel Detroit. And you'll see here that she is designing custom matchbooks and menus for the space. This is an example I actually found on eBay, which is very telling of the design historian's approach to collecting. And then on the right, we have their molded fiberglass lotus chairs that you'll see at the dining scene. But take a look into the back, on that back wall, and I'll point out, to me, really my favorite element of Estelle's interior design, which is the custom murals she was painting for each space. And here you have a 40-foot long mural. Kind of, to me, it seems depicting maybe a jazz scene. You have an upright bassist in the center. And over on the left, you have kind of a leaping figure, really reminiscent of that same motif, the dancing figure from Fun to Run. Estelle herself is very stylishly seated on her invisible chair as well. But again, just going to show they never are transitioning out of design. They're just working in art, in design, and it's really just this cohesive whole. But the last point that I want to end on is that the Lavernes were really marketed themselves as partners in design, much more than even, say, Charles and Ray Eames or Russell and Mary Wright. You almost never hear Irwin's name without hearing Estelle's name accompanying it, which is really quite surprising for the period. And so this was a quote that I saw about the Lavernes in Craft Horizons 1949, which is, through hard work and a dual genius, the Lavernes have found both artistic and commercial success, which shows that art and commerce can be made to live in one house. Although the work grows out of their life together, neither partner dominates the other, and each has his own specialties and distinct manner of working. So that quote really just stuck with me. And on the left, you'll see a 1957 holiday card that the Lavernes sent around, where Estelle and Irwin are seen riding their Laverne at that time, Laverne Originals horse logo, with Estelle in lead and Irwin trailing on the back, holding tight, which kind of just, to me, captured that quote particularly well. So my research continues, and we're really excited to feature several designs by the Lavernes in the summer show that Andrew mentioned at Cranbrook Art Museum. Thank you.
Thank you both. I know you already talked me through some of your slides, but it's always fun to actually hear it again and run through it. We put two different images of the Wrights and the Lavernes' work up here just for point of reference. I think we should probably start by talking or speaking about where you sort of ended, Bridget, which is that when we were starting to plan this talk, we weren't necessarily thinking about this as a project about artistic couples, but it turns out that actually what we're talking about here are two artistic partnerships that were forged in different ways via the League. and how that sort of helped to shape the careers of these artist designers going forward. I wondered if you guys could maybe talk a little bit about what you understand about those artistic partnerships. I mean, obviously, Mary dies fairly early on in Russel's design career, but obviously you talked a little bit about how the Lavernes were very much interlinked. And yeah, maybe if you want to touch on a little bit about that, and then I think maybe you know a little bit more on this, Steffi, about how you see that also being shaped by their respective times at the League.
Yeah, so it is very interesting, and I think throughout Mary's young life you see it change. And it's not surprising to me that this does end up being about couples. In many cases, it does seem like prominent female designers of the time had a counterpart that was in with them, whether it be the Snaren Swansons and others like that, Ruth Adler-Schnee. But in the case of the Wrights, so their partnership was essentially forged when they got married, and it was less than a year that they had met each other, is our understanding. And very early on, Mary downplayed her role in publications within the design partnership. So when she would go demonstrate things at department stores, she would say, well, I'm just a wife, et cetera, et cetera. But we know from historical records and from various things that she was very much a marketing and design genius, and was very crucial to making Wright's line successful. Later on, it seems that she kind of evolved, she may have changed her mind and was much more open to creating her own line with her own name and various other things. And in the publicity, Russell, they would say, like, someone who Russel Wright trusts very much. And the joke is, like, obviously it's Mary Wright, his wife, right? So not only was she big on the marketing and sort of business aspect of it all, but at least towards the end of the career, of her career, her work was more in the forefront than in the beginning.
Yeah, I guess there's a lot to say on this point, but I'll start with even just the names, Estelle and Erwine Laverne. You may be wondering, did I edit it to, kind of emphasize Estelle's name first, et cetera? But in the brochures, in the catalogs, it's always written as Estelle and Erwine Laverne, despite R being alphabetically before S. And my assumption is that it's because Estelle was a poet. She's writing a lot of the copy for their advertisements, their brochures, and their catalogs. So she very literally has a say in their small, self-run business, whereas to just use the most obvious design couple example, Charles and Wright Eames, Herman Miller is deciding if they need to market the product as the office of Charles Eames, the work of Charles Eames. That just wasn't the case for Laverne Originals because it was, literally run by Estelle and Irwin. But yeah, I think just knowing that, it makes it very apparent that she was not going to let herself be written out of that story.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, in the Laverne's case, it's interesting too because they really own and operate their company in its entirety. And similarly, but differently, the Wrights, it's like they're working with manufacturers, but they sort of are the kind of like they determine the kind of like shape of and direction of who they are, their persona as designers in the world, which is different than in the case of like the Eameses, as you point out, where it's like you're under some corporate oligarch or whatever corporate hierarchy where they're trying to stipulate how we're going to market the information.
Yeah.
I think that sort of draws to one of the other things that I think is very resonant here, which is that I think at a place like I think it's particular at a place like the League, which for those of you, I'm sure, who are familiar, that it was from the beginning, the League was really approached its organization as a sort of egalitarian enterprise. So both men and women were represented in schools leadership, and there were men and women's classes, et cetera. So I think one of the other themes that we're sort of grappling with here is the role that women played in shaping American design in the 20th century, and how you kind of both speak to different examples of that. So I wondered if you could think a little bit more about that, because I think it's hard to overstate just how I mean, the conditions are not necessarily available to women in the kind of pre-World War II era for you to just like rise up and have your own independent career, but the fact that these women sort of made a kind of go at it, or at least played a role in helping their kind of partners to have that is I think quite relevant and important. And I don't know if you, Steffi, also know anything about the League in relation to that.
Just that so many female women designers of the time period came through there, like not just Ray Eames, but I believe also Ruth Rees, who's quite a famous textile designer at the time. And the fact that, they were a place where you could take classes. Of course, during Mary and Russel Wright's time period, a sculpture class, or morning painting rather, was separate, one for women, one for men. God forbid you mix the sexes, but even the fact that they were offered and that it was from the start was already very significant. I think in terms of mid-century women, like Andrew said, odds very much against them. And you had previously pointed out, Bridget, that Estelle's name appeared a lot in more like feminine design objects, like textiles, etc. So I think even under these conditions where you feel empowered to follow your own craft like you do at the League, once you hit the marketplace, it's just like the force of things.
Yeah, and I really kind of realized for the first time as I put this presentation together, the arc of them starting in fabrics and wallpapers and then shifting towards designing furniture and product design more like in the late 50s. And so it is worth pointing out that for the first nearly 20 years of Laverne Originals, it is, fabrics and wallpapers, which would have been seen as acceptable for Estelle to be participating in. But at that point, her name's already attached to it. So when furniture comes into the picture, she can't be taken out of the equation. So it's not as if even the furniture designs were only credited to Irwin. Those still really, you see the pair's name, which was interesting.
It makes me think that also maybe Estelle's way into an art career had to do with being able to work in textiles or wallpaper, whereas Russell's way into having an art career was to do design things because he was clearly not a good 2D artist, as you said. So it's interesting that there's some kind of confluence of each of them finding ways to have creative careers because of the conditions that are available or because of who they are or how they are.
The story that kind of the lore is that Russell, so for the record, I have no opinion on how Russell draws. That was a design historian from the 80s. But the story that we're told is that actually it was Mary who brought Russell into design. So he had, after dropping out of Princeton, began working in theaters and making sets and becoming a stage manager. And that's where he was when he met Mary. And the lore is that by 1929, Mary was like, hey, you're actually not very good at this. Why don't you consider making product design? And by golly, she was right. So that it's, in a way, it's that, again, engagement with 3D and the theatrical aspect of it. I mean, they're not the only legal alums, I'm sure, who also had a foot in the theater.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. I think it's also worth pointing out that this moment is very transitional in culture. The period after World War I, leading into World War II, new technologies are developing. There's this sense that this whole burgeoning design industry was this sort of new frontier for kind of artistic innovation. And I have to imagine that for both of them, it was also both sets of couples trying to figure out how can we make something from this kind of changing economic, the economic conditions of the country, and how can we sort of attach our coattails to this or something. And I guess I'm maybe curious if Bridget, how, whether there's anything to understand how the Estelle sort of arrived at this sort of career, founding the business, how that felt what the conditions were maybe here in New York or whatever.
Yeah, so again, they both have this Art Students League background, and in the late 30s, they decide that they need to figure out how to make a profit off of it. And it was a period in late 30s and early 40s when it was extremely inexpensive to buy the materials needed to, start this sort of a business. So it was really just kind of an obvious opportunity for a lot of artists to transition into particularly fabric and textile design. But Irwin actually had at least 2 family members who had background in making wallpaper. So it was in his family. It was really kind of in his blood. And he, I think, grew up painting and working on wallpapers with his father. So it seems like it was passed along to the family. And they are also related to Philip and Calvin Laverne, which I think many people don't realize, but other collectible design from the period.
Yeah, interesting. I think the other thing that I guess I'd sort of be curious to talk a little bit about is like how you see New York as being kind of an incubator for this, because the Lavernes founded their business here in New York, obviously after attending the League. Mary and Russell, I mean, I think Steffi, maybe it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about their trajectory, like searching, from what I recall from conversations with you, the Wrights were sort of like, where is our Eden? And then all of a sudden, Archipenko, Woodstock, like everything, they're like, oh yeah, upstate, that's like where it all happens. But like, clearly there is something about this particular part of the country that was appealing. Like Irwin also came from Romania, right? Like comes from Eastern Europe. Like, I mean, obviously, like this is a huge epicenter of like immigration in the period too. But I think it's just interesting to think about the League is here. Like, there's a lot of foment in the design industry, whatever.
Yeah, totally. The League, New York City was a huge part of it. I think it's lesser known because it's not the National Historic Site that survives. But Mary and Russel Wright had 2 townhouses. And really considered them their other incubator to show their designs. So it was like a triplex, and it was designed specifically for their needs. It fed off of their philosophy that they formed together of very like individualized modernism and modernism that works for you. And even Russell in his oral history even talks about like going on a cross-country trip, and he and Mary thinking for a hot minute that they are going to move to California, and then coming back and being like, no, we're going to stay here in New York. So they do build this Eden for the weekends, but and the fact that Russell eventually retires there and stays there does happen. But New York was very much where their design studio was and where they would come back to. The part of what they liked about Garrison is that it was, only a train ride away.
Yeah, and for the Lavernes, being in New York City and then eventually Long Island at Laurelton Hall, Louis Comfort Tiffany's estate, just meant being extremely well connected to all of the artists, architects, and designers of the day. In the late 40s, they are calling in all of the big names of art and design to design for the Laverne Originals brand. So Alexander Calder, Alvin Lustig, Juliet and Georgi Kepesh. They really kind of bring together this powerhouse team. They're not only just designing their own works. And so just being at that epicenter was very fruitful for them.
I have to imagine also like it's like the art, like the manufacturing hub that New York was, the possibility that industry represented. Like industry then was just so different than it is now. I know we only have like I have 2 other things that I want to touch on, so I'll be brief. But one thing I am curious is actually about how you understand each of these artistic couples like relationship, and how they actually like, how much of it was just like one of professional convenience and how much of it was like also a love partnership. Like, I don't know how relevant that is, but I do think it's interesting in thinking about like that's like a big thing to be able to sustain like this professional and like romantic kind of linkage.
So obviously I wasn't there, but from what I hear from Annie, he really did love Mary, and that was a really big loss for him when she passed away. I can only imagine what that kind of relationship must be like, especially in the 50s, one of equal design partnership in a world where the main name is usually Russell. But they worked really well together. It was actually Mary's idea that Russell sign things, so she really does get a lot of credit when he talks about her. Yeah,
because the personal and professional papers of the Lavernes, don't belong in any institution at the moment. I haven't seen any correspondence between them to kind of elucidate what the dynamic was like. It's often described that you never saw one Laverne without the other, but that could be professional or it could be romantic. It really could be either. They're often marketed not only as a couple, but often shown with their 3 sons too, in this kind of image of the perfect happy family. So that's a big part of their marketing strategy. Who's to say if it was disingenuous or if it was really a beautiful moment captured, but it's kind of hard to parse out. I can't say for certain.
Not to spill the beans, but you also have mentioned that Irwin was particularly difficult for other people to work with, so I have to imagine Estelle probably did a lot of stage managing too.
Yes, right? It seems it seems to be that way.
Before we conclude, I thought, Bridget, could you maybe just tell everybody a little bit about the show that you have been working on for the last few years that will be opening in Cranbrook in June?
Yeah. So I was hired at Cranbrook Art Museum 2.5 years ago, right out of my master's degree, to work on a book-in project on mid-century American design. Cranbrook being kind of the perfect venue for the conversation in that it's often lauded as the cradle of mid-century modernism. And so the show really, the show takes from a Charles Eames quote, "Eventually everything connects, people, ideas, and objects," to weave together a network of people, ideas, and objects that go beyond kind of this canonical design history narrative that we've heard many times through, especially Cranbrook history, bringing in new stories. And so the exhibition opens June 13th and is up through September. I know it's definitely a trek, but if anyone finds themselves 35 minutes outside of Detroit, Cranbrook Academy of Art and Art Museum really is just a lovely alial Saarinen design campus that is absolutely worth seeing and definitely kind of a site of pilgrimage for design lovers and design nerds.
And further closer afield is Manitoga, the Russel Wright Design Center, which I assume that you guys are going to be opening soon for the season, or you're already open?
So the season opens in May. Take the Metro North up to Garrison and visit our website, visitmanitoga.org.
Cool. I think we have just a few minutes for Q&A.